I've got to do something for my own mental health, for my wife's, and for Archie's as well, because I could see where this was headed.
Just when the world had convinced itself that the royal saga had hit its bleakest low, a shocking twist tore through the silence of palace corridors. Behind walls polished by centuries of protocol, a custody deal, long awaited and bitterly contested, was finally signed, yet Prince Harry shattered the fragile calm with revelations so startling they ricocheted far beyond Montecito. No one could have predicted the storm he was about to unleash. Overnight, he fixed his gaze sharply on Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew, levelling allegations so deeply unsettling they threatened to rewrite the story the world thought it knew. Was this a desperate gamble, a calculated strategy, or the first slivers of a truth long buried? The royal family, silent in dread, had prayed that such secrets would never surface, even at the dawn. And as February 3rd broke over a still sleeping world, the Crown acted with its usual ghost-like precision, while cities breathed quietly and headlines remained dormant. Inside Buckingham, a decision had been made that would echo for decades, one not witnessed in living memory. There were no cameras flashing, no urgent press briefings, no carefully drafted statements. At first glance, it appeared almost mundane, a bureaucratic move tucked quietly into the layers of royal procedure. Yet beneath the polished surface, something far more extraordinary had taken place. 2 passports had been locked, not in pursuit of criminals, not to confine suspects, and not in response to scandal. These passports belonged to 2 children, Archie and Lilibet, young, innocent, and born into the glare of one of the most scrutinized families on the planet, their lives already lived under the weight of global attention. The act might have seemed understated in royal parlance, but in reality, it was a seismic shift. Freezing a child's passport is one of the Crown's most discreet yet powerful tools, used neither to punish nor threaten, but to protect when the institution believes something vital has been jeopardized. When a child's safety, identity, or future continuity is perceived as at risk, the Crown does not negotiate. It does not pause for sentiment. It acts decisively and quietly, and its decisions rarely reverse. For Harry, the impact was not immediate shock, but a creeping, disorienting unravelling that spread through every corner of his life. He had believed the worst was behind them. The storm of public attention had burned itself out. Legal agreements were finalised, tension surrounding the children's lives had faded from headlines, and conversations shifted toward cautious cooperation, parallel parenting, structured boundaries. A shared understanding that the children deserved calm, even if the adults could not. There were moments when normalcy felt almost real. Phone calls lost their sharp edge. The constant bracing for impact began to fade. It seemed as though the system had chosen stability over spectacle. Like a long chapter of conflict was finally closing, page by page. Yet what Harry did not see, what no one outside palace walls could, was that another invisible process had been unfolding quietly alongside it all. The Crown does not respond to noise. It responds to patterns. Its actions are not swayed by public apologies or temporary agreements, but by long, hidden assessments that take months, sometimes years, to crystallize. By the time a decision surfaces, it is rarely impulsive. It is the culmination of a deeply calculated process. While the outside world spoke of healing, the institution had already reached a chillingly different conclusion. Those frozen passports were not mere warnings. They were a line drawn silently, a statement that in the Crown's eyes, the narrative was not stabilising. For Harry, the realisation was devastating, not because of what was withheld, but because of what it meant. Time itself seemed to turn against him. The fragile calm he had relied on collapsed instantly. What felt like peace had been nothing more than a pause. Resolution had not arrived. It had only been waiting. And the palace, its response was silence, deliberate and unsettling. Carefully measured pauses filled spaces once occupied by communication, leaving tension that was almost tangible in every corner. Messages that had once drawn instant replies now sat unanswered. Emails that previously sparked immediate attention vanished into an invisible void. Schools, once open and communicative, began responding with polite deflection, gradually moving to complete silence. Doctors cancelled appointments without reason. Mediators' calls went unanswered. Those tasked with maintaining balance, fairness, and continuity suddenly found all channels blocked. Systems that had functioned reliably for years didn't falter. They disappeared entirely. The palace seemed suspended in a deliberate emptiness, surrounded not by noise or chaos, but by a chilling void. Every ignored message, every unanswered call, every vanished opportunity coalesced into an unspoken force far more unnerving than any public outburst could ever be. Silence, wielded with intent and precision, became its own instrument of power. At first glance, none of it seemed unusual. Children miss school. Appointments are cancelled, life happens. Each event on its own had a plausible explanation, but as the days stretched on, a troubling pattern emerged. Schools went quiet, healthcare oversight vanished, and legal communication stalled. Channels designed to safeguard a child's stability, health, and learning broke down simultaneously. Coincidence became harder and harder to believe. What initially appeared as minor adjustments revealed themselves as something else entirely, and suspicion began to creep into spaces once filled with reassurance. Language shifted inside Windsor. Advisors stopped speaking in soft, diplomatic terms. Terms like private family matter or delicate custody arrangement disappeared. In their place were clinical, chilling words: identity risk, emotional displacement, potential erasure. These were not chosen lightly. They suggested far more than mismanagement. They hinted at a child gradually being severed from familiar routines, trusted adults, and the sense of self. Silence, it seemed, was accomplishing what open conflict could not. As briefings moved up the chain, concern deepened. When senior advisors finally met with Prince William, they presented not a list of isolated problems, but a pattern, a timeline, a tightening circle of access. By that point, the palace had long moved past the first question. The issue was no longer whether communication breakdowns were accidental. The real, heavier question was whether the silence was intentional, a calculated strategy within royal systems. That realization changes everything. Once silence is understood as strategy rather than error, patience runs out. Royal institutions are built on continuity, visibility, and accountability. When all three are quietly undermined, alarms trigger without a single raised voice or dramatic confrontation. The absence itself becomes the loudest signal. In the palace, silence is never empty. It speaks, and when it does, the system responds decisively. So what first exposed this hidden game to the public? Not cameras, not press releases, not the flashing gates of royal courtyards. It came quietly, unexpectedly, from a modest school in California, thousands of miles from palaces and politics. On January 31st, as the new term began, teachers prepared classrooms and students filed in, but two desks remained empty: Archie and Lilibet. Once familiar names vanished from the roll call. At first it seemed insignificant. Children miss school, routines shift, families travel. Early absences rarely spark concern, but as the minutes stretched, a subtle unease took hold. The emptiness of those desks grew impossible to ignore. Something was off, beyond the ordinary rhythm of school life, and though no one yet knew what it meant, that quiet, empty space was the first tremor in a story destined to ripple far beyond sunlit California classrooms. There had been no parent email explaining the absence, no withdrawal notice, no transfer request, no homeschooling plan, no alternative arrangements, nothing at all to suggest continuity. By late morning, the administration's unease escalated. Protocol required action. Phone calls were placed. Voicemails left. Emails followed, polite at first, then urgent, yet still silence. Even outreach through representatives produced nothing. The moment the school reached out to the court-appointed mediator, the reply came back empty, silent, and official. There was no record of any approved change. That precise instant marked the invisible line where concern gave way to genuine alarm. In child protection systems, there is always a fragile boundary between family privacy and public responsibility. Once children vanish from the official educational structure without explanation, and once those legally responsible cannot be contacted, that boundary is crossed, and beyond that, the matter is no longer private. It transforms into a safeguarding crisis that demands immediate attention. By early afternoon, it became painfully obvious. That line had been crossed. As daylight slowly surrendered to the long shadows of evening, international child welfare channels were alerted. Not because of the prominence of the children, but because of the glaring void left behind. Investigators scrambled to trace the ordinary markers of family movement: travel documents, immigration updates, official change of residence notices. Yet there was nothing. Not a single indicator of routine family transitions. It was as though the children had evaporated from existence within bureaucratic and institutional eyes. No filings, no residency updates, no homeschooling notifications, which in many jurisdictions are legally required, appeared. Even more alarming, routine healthcare patterns had vanished entirely. Pediatric appointments, meticulously recorded and coordinated under normal circumstances, had been cancelled cleanly, without rescheduling or handover. Referrals to alternative medical providers were absent. Ongoing care had no continuity. The children's lives, as ordinary as they were meant to be, had been rendered invisible across every professional system that should have been watching. This absence of procedural activity spoke louder than any panic could. Families in crisis inevitably leave traces. Even rushed, chaotic decisions create paper trails, mistakes, and signals. Chaos has a signature. It is messy, imperfect, human. But here, nothing bore that hallmark. Instead, investigators found a pattern of deliberate precision. One system after another had been quietly, systematically disengaged, without replacement, without transition to child welfare experts. The meaning was as clear as it was unsettling. This was not confusion or poor planning. It was deliberate. Every safeguard, every structure meant to track, protect, and support the children had been slowly, carefully pulled away. By nightfall, the reality was stark. The children had quietly slipped out of view, with no continuity, no reliable point of contact, no adult or institution ensuring their welfare. This was no longer about missed school days. It was about two children disappearing from all oversight and accountability. Ghosts within their own lives. At this critical moment, the palace sprang into action. Who coordinated the response? Who moved decisively to restore order, continuity, and protection? The answer would emerge in the form of a sudden, unprecedented emergency meeting at Windsor Castle, the fabled halls of power, the red folder that would end all debate and dictate the next steps for an unfolding crisis of constitutional magnitude. The emergency assembly came out of nowhere, like a storm on a seemingly calm day. There were no preliminary calls, no carefully drafted schedules, no gentle explanations or briefings. One moment, the castle was operating with the familiar rhythm of court life. The next, senior officials were briskly guided through heavily guarded doors, their expressions a mix of curiosity, dread, and disbelief. At the entryway, all personal devices were confiscated. Not merely silenced, but removed entirely. Assistants were quietly sent away. Doors closed behind them with absolute finality. No agendas, no briefing notes. The very air seemed to tighten with anticipation. Every clipped instruction, every absent document, every heavy silence broadcasting one unmistakable message. This was no routine meeting. Whispers filled the room in the space between breaths, though no one dared speak aloud. Faces exchanged fleeting glances, silently questioning the same thing. What could have demanded such abrupt, sweeping secrecy? The tension was tangible, like static in the air before a lightning strike. Every controlled step, every measured breath communicated urgency and authority. Into that charged, silent room stepped Princess Anne, carrying a thick red folder. Its weight was immediately obvious, not just in size but in the consequence it contained. She remained standing, commanding attention by presence alone. No one else dared to move. The folder was sealed and stamped with language used only in the gravest constitutional moments. Immediate custodial breach and maternal withdrawal. Breaking the seal felt like breaking the room's collective tension. It tightened the atmosphere further. Inside were meticulously compiled documents from multiple independent systems, education authorities, medical institutions, legal oversight bodies, intelligence advisors, all converging on the same chilling conclusion. The first section detailed abrupt school removals executed without notice. Children were withdrawn without transitions, educational handovers, or safeguarding reviews. Teachers confirmed the disappearances. Administrators verified that no explanations were provided. Every system had been bypassed, creating gaps that should have been impossible in normal circumstances. Next, the folder revealed interruptions in medical care. Mid-treatment appointments had been cancelled, records requested, but never transferred, and ongoing care effectively halted. There was no replacement, no continuity. The gaps were deliberate, precise, and systematic. Standard safeguarding protocols were entirely circumvented. The legal section revealed further alarming patterns. Court-approved communication channels had been ignored. Messages from guardians and representatives were unanswered. Access had not merely failed, it had been actively obstructed. Every roadblock, every silence, carried intention. The pattern left no room for doubt. This was a strategy, not an accident. Financial documents added another layer of shock. A long-established educational trust, worth millions and intended specifically to safeguard the children's schooling, had been quietly dissolved. The funds had been redirected with no replacement, no alternative safeguards, no contingency measures. The safety net that had been painstakingly built over years had been removed entirely. Finally, an intelligence memorandum confirmed the extent of the planning. Months of deliberate preparation, contracts drafted for personal reinvention, instructions to remove all family ties from professional records, and directives ensuring the children's names and images would vanish from future media projects. Chaos was ruled out. Every decision was strategic. One advisor broke the silence with a single, resonant sentence. "This is not co-parenting." No further debate was possible. The evidence spoke with clarity. Observation had become intervention. The Crown moved from the sidelines to direct action. There was no negotiation, no bargaining, no attempt at compromise. The intervention was quiet, lawful, and resolute. At the heart of this action was a rarely invoked constitutional clause, allowing the Crown to act as guardian when minors face displacement, confusion of status, or effective abandonment. The decision was unanimous. No drama, no raised voices, only a shared recognition of the stakes. The circumstances were extraordinary, and the implications exceeded considerations of public opinion or political convenience. Within hours, practical steps were implemented swiftly. Children's passports were secured, commercial use of names, images, and narratives was prohibited, and a restoration fund was established to stabilize education, emotional support, and professional care. Evidence was reviewed silently. Timelines, documents, expert assessments, private reports. The monarch spoke once, briefly but with unmistakable authority. "This is no longer about adults. It is about protecting two children. Emotionally, legally, historically, personal grievances, public narratives, and competing loyalties fell away. What remained was responsibility. Prince Harry formally requested temporary custodial authority. The request was reviewed carefully according to procedure, not sentiment. Guardianship requires stability, clear jurisdiction, and demonstrable capacity. The Crown determined that none of these could be assured, and the request was declined. No condemnation, no moral judgment, strictly institutional duty. There was no press conference. No official statement was issued. No effort was made to manage public reaction or to shape the media narrative. Every element of communication, from press statements to leaks, had been deliberately withheld. The silence was intentional. In the palace, restraint was a tool, wielded with precision, because spectacle, even the faintest, would have undermined the very principle the Crown was acting to uphold: the protection, the continuity, and the stability of the lives of two children caught in the crossfire of adult conflict. This was not about appearances. It was never about image. It was about safeguarding a delicate balance that had been threatened by years of disengagement, obstruction, and chaos. In the absence of explanation, speculation flourished, but that too was understood as a cost worth bearing. The intervention was not punishment, retaliation, or the assertion of dominance. It was the execution of a responsibility that predated any individual, a duty that had existed long before modern scandals or social media narratives, and one that would outlast every controversy, rumour, and passing headline. By choosing silence over performance, the Crown reaffirmed a truth that was simple yet profound. When the welfare of children is at stake, duty does not need applause, it only needs resolve. The question on everyone's mind, at least those following the story from afar, was whether the royal family had stepped in to take full custody of the children. What was the final judgment on the custody deal? The answer would emerge not in dramatic press conferences, not in publicised court documents, but in the quiet, methodical actions of those entrusted with both responsibility and discretion. Anchoring the children while the world's attention drifted elsewhere, while legal wheels turned at a measured, unforgiving pace, a quieter, almost invisible drama unfolded within Windsor. Outside, the legal battles continued as if untouched by the palace's intervention. Paperwork accumulated in stark offices, courtrooms convened with precise formality, headlines churned with speculation. But inside those ancient walls, time moved differently. Days, once punctuated by tension and uncertainty, regained structure. Lessons resumed their rhythm, no longer disrupted by abrupt removals, unanswered calls, or obstructed communications. Predictable, comforting, grounding. Play returned, not as a scheduled activity, a staged performance, or a photo opportunity, but simply as something children did, without agenda, without scrutiny, without expectation. Specialists who had once been tasked with dissection and analysis now took roles of quiet support, calm and steadying presence rather than commentary, helping to restore faith in the normal rhythms of childhood. Stability, it turned out, was not a single grand gesture. It was found in countless small, persistent acts, repeated until they became unshakable. Into this delicate ecosystem stepped Princess Catherine, quietly and deliberately. She made no public announcement, no fanfare, no gestures for cameras. Her presence was restrained but undeniable, a gentle authority ensuring the emotional continuity of the children remained unbroken. There were no staged smiles, no orchestrated images for the press, no attempts at spectacle. There was only guidance, measured and unobtrusive, and the assurance that the world outside, with all its chaos and commentary, could not disturb the delicate balance being restored. Only one photograph managed to escape the palace's protective veil. Without caption or commentary, it depicted Lily, tiny and resolute, walking hand in hand with Princess Charlotte outside Windsor Chapel. For the casual observer, it was a tender, ordinary moment. But for those attuned to the layers beneath the image, it carried quiet power. It spoke of direction restored, control regained, and children once adrift, now anchored. Custodial authority, long neglected and abused, was formally stripped away from those who had repeatedly obstructed welfare oversight. Commercial empires built on privilege and secrecy began to crumble. Trusts, once designed to protect future education and well-being, were frozen. Identities previously exposed were placed under permanent protection. Through all of this, there were no speeches, no public celebrations, no declarations of victory. Inside Windsor, life simply moved forward, quietly, patiently, and deliberately. Meals were shared around familiar tables, gardens were explored in soft afternoon light, lessons, both formal and informal, resumed as they were meant to, and yet, amid this quiet return to normalcy, one question lingered stubbornly. Why had the most explosive accusations only emerged now? The timing, the context, the participants, everything about the accusations demanded answers, and those answers remained obscured, waiting for the moment when truth could illuminate them fully. While the Crown acted decisively, the world outside raged in speculation, fueled by online gossip and social media forums where quiet corners of discussion suddenly exploded into a storm. Why had Harry accused Meghan and Andrew? Was there any connection between them? What hidden networks and relationships did these accusations hint at? Posts multiplied, threads stretched endlessly, and hushed speculation transformed into bold assertion almost overnight. Old images, previously unseen, resurfaced. Social media influencers, small accounts, and anonymous users all echoed the narrative, presenting it as hidden truth rather than mere rumour. The timing, online commentators argued, was not accidental. Andrew's public fall from grace had removed long-standing shields, allowing suppressed details, previously invisible, to resurface. Screenshots of old posts, repeated captions, blurry photographs and fragmentary videos began forming a loose chronology, giving the sense of continuity and intent. At the centre of this digital storm returned a loaded phrase, "yacht girl." Observers used it to describe Meghan's alleged lifestyle prior to royalty, suggesting her access to elite circles, including those tangentially associated with Andrew. The phrase spread rapidly, framed often as context rather than accusation, yet it carried implications heavy enough to sustain debate. Older photos began circulating widely, Meghan aboard yachts, in the company of affluent individuals, and in environments that suggested connections to Andrew's social sphere. Many images were blurry, cropped, or inconclusive. Still, their repeated circulation lent them credibility in the eyes of many online users. Repetition became proof even when clarity was lacking. Past interviews were scrutinized anew. Early career choices were reinterpreted. Innocent moments became evidence in the eyes of those intent on constructing a narrative. Andrew's disgrace was reframed as a key unlocking a sequence of suppressed truths, connecting events and individuals in ways that had remained unspoken for years. Whether fueled by curiosity, belief, or a hunger for scandal, the online conversation reshaped public perception almost overnight. Meghan once again found herself caught in the crossfire of someone else's downfall. In the age of social media, perception solidifies faster than fact. Once a story gains momentum, corrections struggle to keep pace. Amid this storm, the Crown's interventions remained quiet, deliberate, and entirely focused on the children. Custody was restored, oversight reinforced, and protections enacted with precision. Children's routines were stabilised, emotional continuity ensured, education resumed, healthcare appointments were secured. The Crown acted with lawful authority, guided not by public opinion, but by duty. No speeches, no media blitzes, just measured action and unassailable protection. And yet, while immediate safety and stability had been restored, the deeper questions remained unanswered. The motives behind Harry's allegations, the hidden connections between Meghan and Andrew, the timing of the leaks and images, and the meaning of the so-called yacht girl revelations. The Crown's priority was clear: the children. Everything else, speculation, controversy, narrative, would unfold at its own pace. Within Windsor, the ordinary quietly triumphed over chaos. Shared meals, gentle lessons, and daily routines signalled stability more effectively than any headline could. Outside, the digital world debated endlessly. Rumours flourished, and histories were rewritten on threads and forums. Inside, reality moved at its own pace, measured, deliberate, protective. So, what do you think about the outcome of the custody arrangements? Could Meghan and Andrew still have unseen connections? What are your thoughts on the Crown's interventions and the restoration of routine in the children's lives? Share your perspective in the comments, join the conversation, and stay tuned for updates as this unfolding story continues to reveal its layers. The children are anchored now, but the ripples from these events will continue to shape perceptions for years to come, until the full truth finally emerges.